This is a sermon from Hounslow Town Church. We meet every Sunday at 9:45 in the Arts Center, located in the Treaty Center on Hounslow High Street. For more information and resources, please visit hounslowtownchurch.org.
We are continuing in our series of Mark, and as a way of introduction, I want to tell you a story that's an illustration of faith, which is really what this passage is for us today. It's a lesson on faith and what does it mean to believe in God. So some time ago at our home, we had a leak in our home. The bedroom under the front of the house, the roof above that had a leak in it. The sealant was old. The house is old, and so leaks came in, and I didn't really want to spend the money to hire someone in to fix it, so I tried to fix it myself. So I borrowed my neighbor's long ladder because it was high up, as you'll hear in a minute. I bought the sealants, and I wanted to find someone who would keep me safe on the ladder. So my friend Jeremy, some of you know him, he's a very strong person. I brought him over to hold the ladder for me. And so on the day when we went to fix the leak, it was a nice day, it wasn't raining, and I climbed up on the ladder, and I got up about halfway. I was doing fine, about 10 feet off the ground, and about 15 feet off the ground, which is about the height of the windows of the first story of the house. I looked in the window, and then I looked down, and that was my mistake. I looked down, and I became afraid because I was 15 feet up in the air, and I thought of all the very bad things that could happen if I fell. And my knees, of course, as they do when you're afraid, they started to shake like this, and the ladder started to shake, and the ladder got a bit wobbly. And Jeremy, my friend, said to me, "Bear, I feel the ladder shaking because your knees are shaking." And I said, "Jeremy, I'm afraid." And he said to me, "Don't worry, I've got you. I can hold the ladder, and it won't go over. It won't go this way, and it won't go this way." And I thought about it for a moment, and I thought, my life really is in his hands. I'm trusting in the ladder, the strength of the ladder. I did think of all the ways a ladder could break, and I thought of all the ways that Jeremy could lose focus and let go of me. And I thought I could either go forward and try to fix this leak myself, or I could give in to fear and chicken out and go down, and they would have to spend the money to hire someone to go in and fix it for me. And so I made a decision to carry on, and I very, very slowly climbed the last remaining steps and got to the top and did the job. It was about a half hour up there, and I honestly, after a while, you forget how high you are, and you get used to it. But it's a story worth, I think, telling because it illustrates what it means to trust, what it means to put your life into the hands of another. It's really a story of what faith is. And I think today, that's what Jesus is calling us in this passage. That's what this message is about. He's been in the temple teaching those who don't believe in him. He's been teaching skeptics who don't like him. And this Mark 12, we're at the very end of it, it's the closing part of his speech. And in these verses, what Jesus does for us is he gives us a reason for why we can believe in him and why we should believe in him and why we should trust him. So as an outline here, on the slides you can see I have 3 points. Firstly, in verses 35 to 38, we see the one in whom we are to believe. And secondly, we have this warning of what not to believe, what faith does not look like, and that's in verses 39 to 40. And that's this picture of these religious leaders. And lastly, we get a picture. Jesus gives us a picture of a person who does believe, who has saving faith, who has true faith. That's the widow, right, who gave these 2 small coins. So we have a picture of what it looks like to believe. So first, let's consider the one in whom we are to believe. So our text begins with Jesus. He's teaching in the temple, as I mentioned, and he's been talking to the Pharisees. And the Pharisees were a group of religious leaders who taught that you could earn favor with God by following the rules. These were rule followers, yeah? They were much today like religious conservatives of our day and age now. People who believe that it's possible to earn favor with God if you keep all the rules. So he's talking to them. He's also talking to this group called the Sadducees. And the Sadducees, they were like today, perhaps like secular progressives, because they didn't believe in the supernatural, right? They didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead. And so Jesus is interacting with both of them. And what's interesting is both parties want to kill him. And yet what we find is in Mark 12 is that he's discussing with them. He's engaging with them. He's reasoning with them. And at the very last part of this passage in our verses, he gives his reason why we should believe in him. So all along before this, he's been answering their questions. But now he goes on the offensive, as it were. And what he does in verse 35 is he quotes from the Old Testament. So here's what Jesus wants us to know about himself. He quotes from a psalm. It's Psalm 110, which is a psalm of David. And it's a prophecy about the coming Messiah, about Jesus, about the Redeemer. And Psalm 110, verse 1, says this, that the Lord, Yahweh, God, says to my Lord, who is the Messiah, he says, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies my footstool. And this Psalm 110, it goes on and makes other predictions, other prophecies about the coming Messiah. You could read it later, Psalm 110. That's what Jesus quotes for us in Mark 12 here. So there's this messianic promise in Psalm 110 that God would send a Messiah. And elsewhere in the Old Testament, there are other messianic prophecies that the Messiah would be in the line of David, of a son of David. In fact, the verses that were read for us at the start about Palm Sunday, this day, we know that when Jesus came into Jerusalem, the crowd shouted, Hosanna, save us, son of David, right? So the Messiah would be of the line of David, in the lineage of David, right? And so the question Jesus says about Psalm 110, he puts to the crowd and to the teachers of the law, he says, how is it that David can call the Messiah my Lord if he is his descendant, if the Messiah is a descendant of David? So think about it with me for a minute, right? I have children, and I'm hoping one day they will have grandchildren. Would I ever say to my grandchild, would I ever call my grandchild my Lord? Right? Would I ever do that? No, right? Would you call your great-grandson, if you live that long, my Lord? No, you wouldn't, right? Would you, even to your children, and my children who are listening right now, I'm sorry to say, I don't think I'm going to call you my Lord, right? We don't do that. We don't submit our lives in worship to our children. We don't do that, or to our descendants. So how then can David call one of his descendants my Lord? That's what is happening here in Psalm 110 that Jesus quotes. And there's only one answer to this. It's given to us in the Bible. The answer is, the only way for David to do that is this: if the Messiah, if the promised one is also the Son of God. If the Messiah was fully God and fully man, that's how you can answer that question. If the Messiah would be both a son of David and a son of God. And so we've learned about this, haven't we? Recently, well, actually, we're on 35 now, so 14 weeks ago, question 21 of the Catechism was this: what sort of Redeemer, which is another way to say Messiah, is needed to bring us back to God? And that's the question, really, that Jesus is putting to the crowd there when he asked this question of Psalm 110. What sort of Messiah is needed for God to redeem and to save sinful humans like you and I, to put us right in order that we could be forgiven? Can we save ourselves? Can God just forget our sin and pretend as if we didn't ever sin? No. We need a Redeemer. We need a Savior. So what sort of Savior would we need? Answer here from 21. The answer is one who is both truly human and truly God. What we need is someone who would be a son of David and a son of God. And the question then right after is, well, what does that mean to be truly human? Why does that matter? Next question, 22. Why must the Redeemer be truly human? Answer. So question, why does the Messiah have to be of the son of David? Answer, so that in human nature he might on our behalf perfectly obey the whole law and suffer the punishment for human sin, and also that he might sympathize with our weaknesses. In other words, the Messiah, Jesus, must be son of David in order to perfectly represent us, in order to stand for us, to represent us, right? We know what it means to have a representative, right? We're people, we live in Hounslow. Do we want our member of parliament? Do we want our MP to represent us, to be a person of Hounslow? Of course we do, right? A person of Hounslow knows the issues of Hounslow. We don't want someone from Hillingdon. We don't want someone from Ealing. They're not here. They don't know us. We want a Hounslowsian for Hounslow, right? Someone who will be here their whole lives, who knows the brokenness, who knows the needs, who loves this area, who will represent this area, right? That's why the Messiah must be fully human. But why also then fully God, right? Next question, question 23. Why must the Redeemer be truly God? Answer, that because of his divine nature, his obedience and suffering would be perfect and effective. And also that he'd be able to bear the righteous anger of God against sin and yet overcome death. You see, only God could accomplish such a salvation that Jesus did. Only God can do that. Only God can bear the weight of the wrath against sin and overcome it and rise again. Only God could do that. And so back to our text, David calls this Messiah Lord. So how then is he his son, right? Only answer is that the Messiah, Jesus, is both David's son in his human nature, and he's God's son in his divine nature. So that's who we believe in. Jesus tells us here who he is. He tells us here who he is, and he wants us to believe in him. And that's what he next teaches is how we are then to go about trusting in him. And he gives us a really helpful here. He gives us two pictures, one of what not to do and one of what to do. So let's first consider the negative, which is the second point on the outline, right? Verse 38, he says, beware of the scribes, who were the religious leaders at the time. He says, beware of them. In other words, don't be like them. This Bible scholar named Eckhard Schnabel, who I've been reading from, great name, he says this. He says, the word beware is a word which means to watch out for and to learn something from. So he says, beware these guys. Watch them and learn what they're like, and don't copy them. That's what beware means. And Jesus then gives us a picture of what these guys are like, right? It's a picture of an outwardly religious person. He says they walk around in long robes, and they like to be seen. And they like to be seen in the prominent places, in the marketplaces. They want respect. They want to be honored, right? Outwardly, verse 39, they want to be seen. They want the best seats in the synagogue, and they want the places of honor at feasts. You know, they're the sort who want to be invited to a wedding and be given the place of honor right up front, right next to the bride and groom. Why? Because they want to be seen. They want the respect of people around them. And Jesus says, don't imitate this lot. Don't be like them. Their prayers, he says, verse 40, they make a pretense with long prayers. I didn't know what the word pretense means. I had to look that up. Here's what it means. It means that they give the appearance of something which actually is not true. They're fakes, right? They say long prayers outwardly so people can hear, but in their hearts, they're not praying at all in their hearts. They're complete shams, complete fakes, all show. The point Jesus is making is he says, look at these religious leaders who pretend to be religious, but in fact, all that they want is honor and to be seen. Their religion, he says, there's nothing under the surface. It's all outward. It's all a show. He says, learn from them and don't imitate them. Don't imitate them. And then he goes on, and I think he tells us why. I mean, not only are they a fake, but he says, here's the harm that these people do. So look at verse 39. He says, because these people devour widows' houses. This is the one thing that he names, is that they devour the houses of widows. These religious fakes, they do harm, and what they do is they do harm to the people who in society are the most vulnerable. Right? And throughout all of the Bible, God especially identifies with 4 types of people. We see this many times. I was going to list all the times in the Bible for you that he identifies with 4 types of people. But trust me when I say there's a lot of verses in which he identifies with the widow, with the orphan, with the foreigner, and with the poor. Right? Widows, so he's very much a feminist in a biblical sense. He's with the orphans. He's with the foreigners, so he's very much pro-immigration, and he's for the poor. And so here's one place, Exodus 22. He says, you shall not wrong a sojourner, a foreigner, or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. So he's telling God's people, remember you were in Egypt. You were foreigners there. So how they treated you, don't do the same when you have foreigners amongst you, right? Treat the traveler, the foreigner amongst you with honor and respect. Don't oppress them. Then he goes on, you shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you mistreat them and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry. Then he talks about how he will punish them. You can read that yourself in Exodus 22. But do you hear here God's care for the most vulnerable people of society? And God's instruction that his people would do the same, would have the same care for the most vulnerable. And this teaching isn't just a one-off in the Old Testament. No, it's a common theme throughout the whole of the Bible. And so here are these leaders who are showing off their religion, who pretend to be committed to God, but actually what they're doing is they're making widows homeless. By devouring the house of a widow, they're making a widow homeless. Think about that for a minute, right? Stealing the inheritance of a widow. A widow doesn't have a source of income apart from her home. Her home might be able to produce things. Her home it would be a place of which she could provide for herself and be protected. And this lot are taking that from her, taking away her last livelihood. Right? How wicked is this? How terrible is this? And there's a connection, isn't there, between the outward projecting of being self-righteous, of only caring for your image, and then taking advantage of the most vulnerable people. What's the connection? It's rank selfishness. It's saying, I will do anything to get ahead, whether it's my honor or it's my wealth. And often when you have wealth that you get from false means and in wicked means, it only then you use that money to project an image that you could buy your long robes that you parade around in, right? And you could buy places where you could of honor in significant events. Those two are connected. And Jesus says, none of this is not the way for my people. He says, put away selfishness, put away self-centeredness, put away the desire to put yourself first, to think of yourself first. don't be quick to take advantage of the misfortunes of others who are vulnerable for your personal gain. Jesus said, this sort of religion that's dominated by selfishness, put it away. Because that inevitably leads to the oppression of others. When you think of yourself first, you will end up oppressing others, he's saying. So that's a picture for us of what not to do and how not to believe. And then he gives us an alternative, right? It's a widow. So he teaches about those who oppress widows, and now he holds up in verse 42. He says, look at this widow. So this widow came into the temple to give money. She was poor, and she came to give her offering, and she put in 2 small copper coins. These were the smallest coins at the time. They were called leptos. And in today's rate of what we know from the rates of coins then, these 2 coins, I know our text says a penny. That's not quite right. The word penny there is used because that's our smallest coin. But it actually, these 2 leptos are enough to buy you a meal, right? And Jesus says that's all she had. And verse 44, he says, she put out of her poverty everything that she had, all that she had to live on, right? She gave to God at the temple. Her last meal, her last food, she gave over to God. In other words, what is she doing? She's saying to God, God, I'm giving you my life. My last meal, I'm trusting you for. I'm giving you my life, right? She believed the Old Testament promises about God's care for the widow, right? So here's one. I read one earlier, but here's another one. Psalm 68:5 says this about God. He is father of the fatherless and protector of the widows is God in his holy habitation. She believed that. That was her faith. She took God at his word and said, my trust will not be in money, but rather, God, it will be in you. And I'm going to trust you so much, I'm going to give to you my last meal because I believe you will provide for me. Jesus points out for us how everyone else gives, right? She gave her all. Jesus points out, look at the wealthy. And I'm going to put all of us like within that camp, the wealthy. We give to God what we can. We give to God when we feel that we have a surplus, we give. But this widow, she gave everything. She gave her life to God. And Jesus points to her and says, that's faith. That's what faith is. And by doing that, he calls us to do the same. And so this morning, I want to ask you, that's a scary thought, isn't it? What she does is bold faith. And we would rightly ask the question, God, are you saying that I've got to give you all my money? Do I have to give you all I have? How can I do that? Here's how I think. The answer is we are called to give our life to Christ. But go back to who he is. Remember who he is. He is Son of God, Son of David. And as Son of God, Christ took on flesh and was born to Mary as a son of David. He lived a life of poverty. At his death, he was beaten. He was mocked. He was betrayed. He was stripped naked. He was falsely punished on the cross. He took on poverty. He gave his life away in order that we might have life, in order that we might know the riches of God. And so the call of this passage, the reason that Jesus, the reason that Jesus gives us as to how we are to live our life is to give our life to the one who gave his life away for us. See, Jesus is like this poor widow. He gave his all to God for us. He gave it all away. Like her, he perfectly loved God. We learned what it means to love God last week, right? To love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. This woman did that. Jesus did that. So our response to him is to give our life to him, the one who perfectly gave his life away for our sake. Right? In preparing for this teaching, I heard this illustration that I think gets at what true faith is like really well, and what I'm encouraging you to do. Hear this story of this guy named Charles Blondin. Blondin actually died here in Ealing. He's French, spent a time in America, and then ended his life right here in Ealing. His last days were here. In fact, in Ealing, which is just the next town over, there are two streets named after him, Blondin Avenue and Niagara Avenue. And Niagara Avenue is significant. In fact, he lived in a house called the Niagara House. And yes, that's named after the famous falls in America, because Charles Blondin was famous for being the first person, I think, certainly the most famous person, to walk across Niagara Falls on a tightrope. So his tightrope was about this wide, about 2 inches in diameter wide. It was a really long tightrope, and he did it a number of times. The first time he did it, he walked across, and it drew a crowd, and of course he wanted to draw a bigger crowd. I think they're making money off of it. So the second time he drank wine halfway through. He walked across. He lowered a rope down. There's this boat that's still there, same name of the boat, called the Maid of the Mist. And this boat came up right under him. He lowered a rope. They put a bucket on it, put a bottle of wine, wine glass in it. Up it went. In the middle of this rope across Niagara Falls, he had a glass of wine, finished off, right? So that was pretty amazing. Next time, he rode a bicycle across it. The next time, on his back, he put a stove, some eggs, a frying pan, and in the middle of Niagara Falls on this rope, he fried himself an omelet and ate an omelet and went on, right? The season was coming to an end, and he really wanted to draw a big crowd. So what he did, he said, I'm going to take someone across. And he offered $1,000, which in 1859 was an insane amount of money. And they put the word out in the paper, who would like to come? And many people showed up. And they selected a group, trained them in how to do it. And then when the time came, he said to this crowd, who would now like to do it? He asked them, do you believe that I could do it? And all of them raised their hand. Yes, we believe. We believe you could take us across, no problem. And he said, okay, step forward, who would like to? And none of them stepped forward. They all were afraid, right? None of them had faith. So Blondin said to his manager, what are we going to do? His manager's name was Harry. And Blondin said to Harry, you're my manager. It's got to be you, right? And so the manager agreed, and they went across. Harry was on his back. And as they got about halfway, it takes about 20 minutes to walk across the falls on a tightrope. And about halfway, Blondin got tired. And just as my legs kind of buckled, I told you earlier, his legs buckled, and he swayed. He swayed on the tightrope. Now, he had a big pole, and swaying for him would be normal. But for Harry on the back, that's not normal. Harry freaked out, as you feel yourself swaying, right? And what does Harry do? He goes the other way, right? But he overcompensates. And so Blondin then had to compensate that way, and they started to sway, working against each other. And so Blondin shouts out to Harry in a loud voice. This was heard. He's quoted as saying, look up, Harry. You are no longer Harry. Colcord is his name. You are Blondin. Until I clear this place, be a part of me, mind, body, and soul. If I sway with me. Do not attempt to do any balancing yourself. If you do, we will both go to our death. You hear what he's saying? He's saying, we need to become one. And if we wobble, let me correct. Don't you correct. Because if you correct, you'll overcorrect and we'll go over. And that's no good. We'll both die. See, that's a picture of what faith in Christ is like. You give your life fully to him. You rest upon him, and you let him save you. You fully give your life for him. Why? Because he gave his life for you. And so faith means you become one with him, such that he is your hope. He is your life. He becomes your life. He becomes your purpose. He becomes your love. He becomes your cleansing, your righteousness, your reputation. He becomes your all in all. And so when the wobbles of life come, right? And the wobbles of life do come, Jesus says, let me deal with those. Don't try to compensate it. Don't try to take life into your own hands. Because when you do, you're going to make a mess of it. Instead, trust me in the wobbles of life. When the wind blows and our weight shifts, let me do it because I've been there before, right? In fact, to take the illustration further, he says, don't worry about even falling down into the waters and the abyss, Jesus says, because I've already been there and I've come up again. I'm alive. So trust me fully for your life. When the wobbles come, trust me. So this morning, can I ask you, are you doing that today? Have you trusted Christ with your life? Perhaps for the first time? But if you've been a follower of Jesus, like me, for many years, this morning, are you trusting in him in the wobbles of life? What is the wobble of your life right now where you feel life shifting under you? You can go one of two ways. You can course correct yourself and go off in your own direction, or you could say, Lord, I trust you. You are so worthy. You have the power and strength to carry me the whole way. I trust in you. Can I ask you this morning, would you give to him your all? He is fully Son of God, fully Son of Man. He alone is the perfect one to represent you before God. He's the perfect one to save you in all of life. Let's pray.